Our reporter Molly Coffey went down to the library yesterday and spoke to Exhibition Project Manager Adam Bayfield and Chief Librarian Cornelia James to learn more.
Thomas Guille and Guille-Allès were childhood friends who grew up together here in Guernsey in the early 19th century. In 1832, they emigrated to New York at the age of 14, so incredibly young. It's kind of hard to imagine, especially this is an age before steamships, so they sailed across the Atlantic. It took them about 6 weeks to get there. But they joined a friend of the family who'd already set up a business in New York, and they became apprentice carpenters. And because they were apprentices, they had access to something called the Apprentices' Library, which was one of the oldest and amazingly sort of grand institution. And they were so sort of blown away by this, they kind of walked into the library. We have an amazing quote from Thomas Guille in his diary that he was just so astonished by what he saw that he said, there and then, right, one day I'm going to come back to Guernsey and start a library like this and take something back for the people of the island so that they can have access to something like this too. So remember, they were 14 at this point, but they held on to this dream really all the way through their lives. It did become a lifelong mission. They started buying books at the age of 14. They kept buying books. They stayed in New York and kept buying books all the way through. In the end, they built up a collection of about 70,000 volumes. And when they finally retired in their 60s, they brought those books back with them to the island. They bought this building that we're sitting in at the moment in Market Square, and they opened the library 50 years after that initial dream in 1882.
How does the exhibition trace that journey then?
We're bringing that story to life. We've got material from our archive. There's letters, as I say, there's diary entries from Thomas Guille. There's little bits and pieces like a receipt for the tiles on the floor, just little things like that that really conjure the picture for you. But we've also got on display some of the treasures in the library's collection that people don't normally get to see. So when the library first opened, it was both a library and a museum. And so we have the museum that was on the top floor of the building until 1979. The contents were transferred at that time on indefinite loan to Guernsey Museums and still form a part of the collection at Guernsey Museum. So we've been working with the team at the museums who've been absolutely amazing, and they've helped us to curate and they've lent us showcases, and we've been able to bring some of those items back to the library for the first time in 40 years. So people can see some of these amazing things that are still in the library's collection.
And it is amazing that right from the onset, it was more than a library. Their curiosity was boundless in that it went beyond books, didn't it? How much of that have you sort of retained in your ethos at the library?
Guille-Allès were always keen that the library should never just be a library. They really envisaged a hub for the community where people could learn and have opportunities. And in what was the Hayward Room now, there used to be lunchtime lectures. They would have French societies and choral societies. They even had a chess club and even a table tennis club. And very much so, we've come full circle. 140 years later, we're still striving to live up to that original vision. We're still singing to babies now. We have cutting-edge technology in the Fab Lab, which would be unheard of for Guille-Allès, and things like ebooks, but I feel sure that they definitely approve.
It's accessible, the exhibition, to all ages, isn't it? I've been noticing these little parrots around, which links to this very special part of the exhibition that you were talking to me about birds. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, probably the star attraction of the exhibition is this book called The Birds of America by John James Audubon, which is one of the rarest, many would say one of the most beautiful books in the world, and we do have a copy here in the collection of the library. So Audubon kind of set himself the challenge that he was going to paint every species of bird in North America, and it took him about 12 years to do this and put this book together. And because he was adamant that he was going to paint them all life-size, and this includes things like flamingos, turkeys, eagles, the book is absolutely enormous. So for listeners, it can be hard to imagine until you actually see it, but the pages are about a metre high. It takes two people to turn the page. So it's a really kind of spectacular sight. The images are incredible. It's huge. And as I say, it is one of the rarest books in the world. There are not many out there in the world, and we do have a copy that was acquired by Guille-Allès. It's not normally on public display, obviously, so this is a really rare opportunity to come and see it. And the children's element that you're touching on is we've worked hard to make sure that the exhibition is engaging for children. We want to make sure everyone in the community can enjoy the exhibition. So the children's team have worked really hard to create a children's trail. So there are little activity sheets that they can pick up, and there are parrot icons dotted around that wherever they see a parrot, there'll be a little fact or something that will help them answer a question on their sheet. The first thing really to say is that these are two rooms that until this were not publicly accessible rooms. So they were used as storerooms and administration rooms. So as part of this, we are opening two new rooms of the library as well. So there was a big job of work in the first place to get them ready. The library staff have done everything, have painted and decorated and turned them into rooms that are suitable to host the exhibition. And then we've put together, with the help of the museum, we have showcases, and we've tried to curate into different sections. So the museum that Guille-Allès set up, obviously they were Victorian gentlemen, and there was a real kind of Victorian flavour to it, and it had a real sort of wonders of the world vibe. So there's just a huge range, a huge diversity of objects. There's just things from all over the world. We've got ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, and then we've sort of tried to group into categories. So we have a showcase that has clothing items, we've got natural history, we've got weapons and ritual, and one of my favourite things here is the shark-toothed dagger from Polynesia. So there's such a range of stuff.
That really embodies the exhibition name, doesn't it? Boundless Curiosity. This goes way beyond what the founders actually acquired themselves. Maybe you can talk a little bit about acquisition. Where did these objects come from?
So some things were acquired by Guille-Allès themselves, but then also as they set up the museum, and it obviously became well known here in Guernsey, objects were donated by other local people, so people that had travelled the world. People will read as they go around and see the captions that there was, sort of ex-army officers that had served in different parts of the world and brought things back with them. So yeah, we've got things, there's actually quite a lot of things from the South Pacific. We've got something from, there's sort of Native American objects, there's Africa. It really is, I think we've got something from every continent.
Yeah.
So it's a real sort of global feel.
Should we take a look at some of the objects?
We have a couple of paintings on display here by Peter Leliva, who I'm sure some listeners will know is a sort of well-known local artist. I have to say, before putting this exhibition together, I didn't know that he was not famous in his time. In fact, not only that, but he didn't share his work with anybody at the time. He was well known as a kind of local politician and in various different fields, but his art was just something he did as a hobby, and he didn't share it with anybody. He died in 1878, but it was not only then, but it was actually after his sister died in 1904 that she bequeathed his paintings to the library, and there was an exhibition here, and that was the first time his work had ever been shown publicly, and that was when he started. I guess people were like, well, this is amazing, and he became quite well known off the back of that.
There is one painting here that's in Le Couture, which I just drove up the other day, and it's for gridlock traffic. So it's lovely to see Guernsey as it was in the 1850s. And there's another painting here of a lane near Le Chêne in the forest, which again is a very busy crossroads on the way to the airport. So it does evoke a time of, Guernsey gone by.
Let's have a look around here. Gosh, these look interesting. Chinese slippers, wooden headrest, Native American moccasins. Talk to me about them.
They're sort of ankle flaps that would have been worn by, this is a particular indigenous people called the Cree that was mainly based in Canada. This area here that we've curated is sort of clothing. There's sort of an interesting aspect of it is sort of looking back at the fact that they did sort of make mistakes in the original collection and curation as well. So these Chinese slippers that we have on display here, they're listed in the original records as being Japanese, but now the museum team can look and say, well, they're not Japanese, this is actually Chinese Manchu. So even that is just quite an interesting sort of backstory as well.
Yeah, absolutely, that the museum work or the library work goes on, and it's a continuous project. And looking over here, and I can see another parrot, these items look really ancient. So this is from Egypt?
Yes, so this section here, there's religious and funerary objects here. So this little blue object that you can see, little blue figurine, is I think the oldest thing that we have on display in the exhibition. So this is called a ushabti, which is a funerary figurine from ancient Egypt. So this is 1st millennium BC, and this is something that would have been placed in tombs. The idea was to sort of help to protect the deceased in the afterlife.
And the more affluent you were, the more you had.
This is the natural history section. So we've got some ammonites here that are millions of years old.
Yes, that is the oldest.
And there's a starfish that apparently was gathered close to Guernsey. But we did talk about the museum being on the top floor of the library, and many islanders do still remember the library when it was a library and museum. But one of the most notable things they might remember was the number of stuffed animals up there. And that was very much a Victorian thing, that taxidermy. We do have an armadillo here, which is a little nod to that Victorian floor of the library, that curiosity.
And it was very much a Victorian cultural obsession, wasn't it? Bringing items from the outside world into the museum and inspecting them in glass cases. I mean, I suppose we still sort of do that today.
Well, actually, that's something that we could talk about when we look at Audubon's work, because that's something that he actually did to enable him to paint the pictures in such detail.
Should we go over to the book?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, this is just jaw-dropping, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I suppose it's a little bit hard to describe. You really do have to see it to appreciate the scale of it and the majesty of the illustration. Like, it's a really spectacular sight. This is The Birds of America, which is one of the rarest books in the world. I think one of the most beautiful books in the world. And the pages are a metre high. It takes two people to turn the page. And this is John James Audubon, who was the artist and naturalist who put this together. He set himself the challenge to paint every species of bird in North America, and he wanted to paint them life-size, which is why the book is so enormous. And he also set out to capture what he described as the spirit of the bird, or I suppose the essence of the bird, and not just a kind of visual representation, but to help people understand how they really live in their natural habitat. And this is a time before photography, of course, so people just really hadn't seen this before. They hadn't seen birds represented in this way, and it really helped to change people's understanding of birds in their natural environment. They're just extraordinary illustrations. They're so beautiful. We're looking at the moment at the flamingo. It's not just the fact that the flamingo itself is so well captured, but it's, the background behind it. You see other flamingos kind of dipping their heads into the water. And as I say, it's really showing the bird in its natural environment, which people just wouldn't have seen before.
There's some 140 plates in this edition, and so we will be turning a page every week so that people will get to see a different image each week.